this chapter, we're going to be looking at password attack methods, keystroke loggers, Unix passwords, NetBIOS auditing tools, dictionary attacks, basically NAT dictionary attacks, Hydra, Windows passwords, rainbow tables, password sniffing, and Cain-enable. It is a very common event for people to try to figure out the passwords of others, because if you can get past the passwords, then you can get into the accounts. So there's various methods that people will use to try to figure out the password of the person they wish to, the account they wish to get into. So some methods are based on social attacks, such as dumpster diving, shoulder surfing, social engineering. And also there's digital attacks, keystroke loggers, brute force attacks, dictionary attacks, and rainbow tables. Some of these will be detailed in upcoming slides, but some that are not detailed. In the social attacks, there is a thing called dumpster diving, and it is what it sounds like. It's actually going through the trash in the dumpster for various companies, trying to see if they've thrown away anything valuable. There may actually be some paperwork that they've thrown away that could have employee names, employee passwords, just details about what software they're using, what computers they're using, which all helps a hacker learn more about the company during their information gathering phase. So it can be very helpful, and that could lead to better social engineering as well. Now, shoulder surfing is when someone stands behind a computer user and just kind of looks over their shoulder and looks at the keyboard perhaps, or looks at their computer screen to see what can be revealed. It might be watching their fingers type, and if they type slowly enough, we could pick up a password. Or perhaps we can see they're typing some document that would be of a personal nature or related to business that they do not want everybody seeing, and shoulder surfing would help with that. Social engineering. That is actually a really big area. This chapter really doesn't do a lot with this, but it is worth looking at. There actually was a hacker named Kevin Mitnick, and he went to jail for a while. A little bit about him. Social engineering, though, is one of the things he did that helped him have great success. That was just part of it. It was not just technical attacks. So when you think of a hacker, I think many times we think of the hacker just being really great with computer skills. They know how to use the computer and break into other computers through electronic means. But actually, there's a lot that can be gathered through simply the human factor. And, you know, there's some really good information out there about him. And he was, just, again, a pretty famous hacker here. But more on him. He actually wrote some books. Art of Intrusion, Art of Deception, and so on. But this one in particular was social engineering. And kind of the idea was being able to work with people and see if they will give up their information, essentially using psychology on them. He may have potentially, or a person doing social engineering, may have tried to manipulate the user. They may try to intimidate the user so they feel, hey, I better give this information up because you're the big boss and I could get fired if I don't give you the information. And of course, someone doing the social engineering could actually be, the idea is they're faking it. They're pretending to be the boss. They're pretending to be someone of importance, or pretending to be someone in a desperate situation which will lose their job if you don't reset their password. You know, whatever it may be. It's a lot of deception. It is the human factor, and I don't think a lot of computer books give it enough credit, but there's a lot that can be gathered from users simply by manipulation. And you see it on television too if you really watch social engineering. So the social engineering part, even though it's not a type of a technical attack, it is quite effective. Interesting book to read here. It's always nice if you're a hacker and all you've got to do is just kind of talk to the people and make them be your pal and get them to give up information that way, or say, hey, I'm the, you know, higher up at the other location within our company and you better do this or you're going to lose your job. You know, on and on with scenarios. So, big area. digital attacks with that, the keystroke logger is one I want to look at especially. Keystroke loggers. Basically, these are ways of obtaining usernames, passwords, and pretty much anything you type. And the slide does show us there are some various companies out there. There's many more by now, but there's lots and lots of companies that are out there to produce software as well as hardware that you can use to try to log the keystrokes of the users. And it could be on their Facebook, it could be their word processing documents, their passwords, whatever it may be. And of course, the actual software ones are, I think, easier to hide in a lot of ways, but at the same time, if it's a piece of hardware that's typed in, actually plugged in line with your, your keyboard going to the back of your computer, a lot of times computers are put in such a way they're actually placed on some table and it may be in a corner. It may not be real easy or common for someone to get on the floor and get behind the computer and look at all the connectivity that we might have. Now looking through these, here's keystroke logger. This is just one I was Google searching on and just kind of ran into it. And some go beyond just simply logging your keystroke. This one actually brags about being able to essentially show what you've typed in your email, your chat, your instant messaging. And it is rather stealthy, so most users would not even know that it's running. This kind of shows some of the features, and this is just a mere example of the many keystroke loggers that are out there. Some go way beyond keystroke logging, even spying on you completely with actually getting screenshots, Facebook chat logging, looking at that, location reporting, Skype chat and call recording, Gmail, on and on. So basically anything you type could be picked up. Now from the hardware perspective, there is just an example, actually one more software one. With Spectre Pro has been around for years. And the kind of idea is, hey, I want to make sure my children are not getting harmed on the internet. I want to make sure that my employees are not goofing off, playing on Facebook all day long, wasting time, not doing their job. I want to see what they're doing. So as you can see, many of these software products go way beyond merely logging your keystrokes. They actually show where you've gone, and they can do screenshots just to prove and kind of back up what has happened on that system. So basically it's a big spy, basically spying on you. On to keystroke loggers that are hardware based. These have been around for years, and some of these are older style PS2 ones, which is just simply a different type, or they could be the more modern USB. But irregardless, you can see in these various pictures where we actually have the keyboard. This is the keyboard cable that would normally plug into the back of a USB on the computer, actually is plugged into this extra piece, and that's the keystroke logger, or it could be PS2. Actually, I bought a computer just this past year, and you would think PS2 would be gone, but there were some PS2 ports on there along with all the high-tech new goodies that you could get on a computer. So it was kind of interesting. So it really doesn't matter, which one, one being better than the other. It's just simply having hardware plugged into the back of the computer where most people don't get on the floor, get behind the, in awkward spaces trying to actually look at the back of it. So you may not even realize that this little piece has been inserted into the back of your machine and just the keyboard plugs into that. There's actually even keystroke loggers that are full-blown keyboards, but I think most people would figure that one out. Okay, so they come in multiple forms. Next thing, password recovery options. When we think about getting passwords, a lot of times we're trying to, figure out those passwords, crack those passwords. So there's password recovery software. It generally works on cracking a passphrase, and there's various approaches, there's various difficulty levels. We have classification of easy, medium, and complex. That's where they come up with the EMC. And it all relates to how long is it going to take me to crack that password. Easy, anywhere from a few seconds to a couple of hours to figure out your password. Medium, 24 to 48 hours to recover. Complex, suggesting 48 hours or more, or somewhat indefinite. Pretty good privacy PGP passwords could take up to 250 days to crack at this point in time. Of course, the reason I say at this point in time, realize it depends on what computer systems you're using. I mean, if you have some sort of supercomputer working on it, it's going to be faster, or many computers working together as a unit. All computers are not created equal. We have faster CPUs, we have more RAM, so that's going to have an impact on it as well. So these are just merely examples. Now, there's an operating system called Unix, and we're talking about there's 3 primary algorithms used in Unix and basically Linux too. Linux is what we hear of, I think, mostly. We have DES, Data Encryption Standard. We have MD5 and Blowfish. And basically, MD5, if we were actually looking at our passwords, looking at this information on a Linux system, you would look, you see $1, this indicates it's using MD5. $2 would indicate we're using Blowfish. Now, MD5 is actually rather popular when it comes to making passwords look in a format that's basically unreadable to most. MD5 is rather common also for storing passwords on Cisco devices as well. Now, password cracking tools, I mean, there's a variety of those out there. They're suggesting one called Crack. Simply need a password file and it does it for you. So just merely an example. More and more password crackers keep coming out, and you just kind of have to pick the one that works best for you. But essentially, you have some that will use a password file or so-called dictionary file, or maybe send it to some sort of database to try to figure this out. We have a popular one in the Unix world called John the Ripper. Especially if you're trying to crack, they say MD5 or Blowfish, and MD5 is extremely common. Here we have the NAT Dictionary Attack Tool, which stands for NetBIOS Auditing Tool. And on older systems, especially in Microsoft world, we have something called SMB shares. And the idea is to when you try to get to various printers, that could be an SMB share, and we're trying to figure out if there's any sort of password protect on that. And the idea is to try to go through a file that basically a password list and try to crack the password for these SMB shares. So it would be a command line tool such as this one, where you would output your results to a file name, and you would have a user list and a password list, and it would just kind of work through it on a given system. Here's just another example. Network logon cracker tool that supports a variety of protocols, as surely you recognize: Telnet, FTP, HTTP, HTTPS, and so on. Now, cracking passwords in the Windows context. We've just left the Linux Unix world. Now, this is with Windows. Now, we could simply try to guess your password. That's always a possibility. We could actually write some sort of script that would go through and try again to figure out your password, maybe tying into a dictionary, some sort of file that's like a dictionary of sorts. These days, there's so many automated tools that would probably be the way to go. Some sort of automated tool to enter username and passwords, and then just try and see if it can break through. So apparently TS Grinder was an automated password guessing tool back in the day with your Windows 2000 Advanced Server. But it's come a long way, and the names change, but the concept doesn't. So the exact tools listed here are really of not that great of importance. It's more a proof of concept. It's to show that it is doable, that we have in the past been able to crack passwords, and we still can. It's just a matter of what tool you would prefer to use. Now, when you think of Microsoft systems over the years and how they've evolved, we had passwords that were stored many years ago as in a LAN manager format, and then later on it was an NT LAN manager format, and then there was even NTLM version 2 that was even a further enhancement. And then eventually, when we got to Windows 2000, we started storing passwords in a different way, and we started using Kerberos. And we basically were trying to get away from these old methods. Now, when you hear the word hashes, realize it's essentially a way to store passwords in somewhat of a garbled format that kind of resembles encryption, but it's really called hashing. Because the theory behind it is that you can take your clear text password, turn it into something that looks almost encrypted, but the thinking is that it's one way, that you would not be able to reverse engineer it and put it back into its original form easily. It's kind of like the idea of it's easy to break the glass. If I throw a rock and I throw it through a window, I can break the glass easily. Can I put that glass back together? Not so much. It's going to be very difficult or near impossible to put the glass pieces back together and make it the way it was before. Now, password cracking can involve, obtaining the password hash off of a computer and then trying to do an offline attack. That way, your computer system is not going to limit you on how many times you try the password out. With computer systems that are live, many times when you try to crack a password, it is actually going to limit you, as if I went to my Windows system and I tried to log into my company network and I messed up my password 3 times. It's a good chance I'll be locked out. My account will lock and I will not be able to continue to work at it. So to avoid that, hackers will many times try to get a copy of the passwords in this garbled or hashed format so that they can do offline attacks and work at it endlessly. Now, basically we had a SAM, a Security Accounts Manager database on local systems. We have Active Directory databases as well. Traditionally, when we had the original LANman, and the NTLM was very similar too, we essentially had a max length of 14 characters. And you'll see the process coming up. So, before encrypting the password to create the LANman hash, the 14-character string would be split into like 7 and 7. It would be split in half. And then the system would continue to try to crack the 7 characters and then the other 7 characters. Now, back in the day of the LANman, passwords were actually pretty easy to crack. Funny enough, I don't think it was till Windows Vista that we stopped supporting by default the backwards compatibility to store our passwords in modern format as well as some of these older formats like NTLM version 2. This is actually showing a tool called Kane Enable, and this is known for being able to do offline attacks. They're showing LAN Manager and NTLM hashes because remember again, anything older like Windows XP had a problem of actually storing the passwords in this older format as well as a modern format, and then there was still a possibility of attacking the older format. So with the LAN Manager hash encryption, whatever your password would be, it would try to pad it with blank characters to make it 14 characters, and it would convert it to uppercase, and then, like mentioned earlier, it would break it down into 2 7-character strings and essentially work on the 2 7-character strings independently. The first one would take a bit of time and the second would be much faster. So even when we went to the versions like NT4 and beyond, we still had these formats at hand. We had just NT LAN Manager. It was a bit of an enhancement, but essentially passwords were stored in a hashed format, but still with a lot of weaknesses, even though there was some improvement. Now, with the NT4 system, which is, a bit older, and we were back when we were using Service Pack 3, we had this concept called syskey, and it was a way to increase security. It added additional encryption, 128-bit, to your Security Accounts Manager database. That was a local database of, your passwords and such, user accounts. And it was, back then, we would have used something like Loftcrack 4. We have Loftcrack 5. It's gone beyond this. And what the syskey did was that it added some difficulty to it because we added additional encryption. So that was kind of the intention of it. Now, we have something called rainbow tables. When we look at trying to crack passwords, there's various methods. Now, we could try to guess it, as I spoke of. We could try to go through, many password crackers will let you point to a a file that would be essentially a dictionary file. We could try various passwords like that. We could try to brute force and try every possible combination. That could take a while. We could actually pre-compute the various combinations. It's kind of like brute force, but storing it ahead of time. So going through all the work and then saving it as a file, and that's called a rainbow table. Now looking at rainbow tables, you can actually download rainbow tables, and it's like you went through the brute force of the password, which takes a lot of time, but yet you stored it. You actually store it in a very large file. So these rainbow tables then could be used in conjunction with your password cracking program, such as LoftCrack. And with this, you have these various rainbow tables, whether it's based on the old LAN manager or based on the MD5, which Cisco has a tendency to use. A lot of different variations. Maybe it's an NTLM-based system. And you would download these and then try to use that with your password cracker, and the idea was to crack the password in a more speedy format. Now, the Windows passwords would be easier to crack with this than you would find the Linux or the Unix systems. Linux passwords are salted. That's a term that's used. Salting a password actually adds randomness to the password, making it virtually impossible to crack. Windows systems do not salt their passwords. Linux and Unix systems do salt their passwords. Passwords that are not salted, such as Windows, we would have greater success with rainbow tables than we would with a Linux Unix system. And here's just showing off a tool that you could use to create rainbow tables. But again, as you Google search on the internet, you will find that there's several sites to download rainbow tables, so you don't have to generate your own, because it is a very time-consuming process. But yet there are tools that will help you do this too. Here's some free rainbow tables, as we've already looked, rainbowtables.shamoo.com. Now, NT password a hash insertion attack. So I think as far back as I can remember, if you give the hacker physical access to the system, it's going to be very, very difficult to keep them out of your system. As Novell would have said, if you cannot guarantee the physical security of your server, we can't help you. I mean, that was kind of the understanding. Because if the system is right there, many times we could potentially actually boot off of a USB device, CD-ROM, whatever it may be, and actually not crack the password, actually change the password, because we have physical access. I've heard Linux people say that before too, when we've lost passwords or forgotten them on our systems. They go, just give me the Linux CD, I'll boot off of it and I'll reset it for you because I have physical access. That was the rationale. I remember it back in the floppy days, actually having a floppy disk that we could boot off of and actually change the password. We didn't have to crack it. We had physical access. So this is just an example, another proof of concept. Not that this is the end-all tool, but the concept is that there are utilities out there that will let you change administrative passwords. And of course, they're picking on Windows here specifically, but it's for many different systems. So the system could be booted by the old-fashioned floppy or CD or USB device. And a lot of these password changers, you might say, were Linux-based. And you just essentially just went through the process and you were able to, you could blank out the password, change it to something new, and it was pretty successful. Now, another way when you start thinking about passwords, as far as cracking passwords, well, why don't we just try to sniff the passwords? Maybe our target is not encrypting what they're doing. Maybe they're logging into an FTP server because they want to transfer some files, and there's no encryption whatsoever on that FTP server. And with this, we could just use a tool like Wireshark and just sniff the traffic, and if there's a true FTP session with a username and password, it will actually show up in clear text. Now, additionally in this slide, break-in, could employ technical, physical, or social engineering attacks. Sometimes you could just simply ask the user for their password and give them a good reason, and they'll just give it up. Sometimes if you go to help a user with a technical issue, they'll say, do you need my password? Or yell it down the hallway. Here's my password, you need it? So it can definitely be gathered, but the sniffer is an intriguing one, especially if you use something like Wireshark. And of course, you may find passwords even stored in a file. Now, as far as getting passwords, couple here. I've kind of jumped into sniffers, but I do want to do a little more with Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel is also a password recovery tool, and if you really just go to their website, oxid.it, you'll actually see that it's fully capable. Now with Cain and Abel, you can actually do many things. Sniffing the network, cracking encrypted passwords using dictionary, brute force, and cryptanalysis, recording voice over IP conversation, decoding scrambled passwords, recovering wireless network keys, revealing password boxes, cached passwords, routing protocols. It goes on and on. There's man-in-the-middle attacks that can be used, and you'd be amazed the passwords that can be retrieved with these various man-in-the-middle attacks. If you ever research Cain and Abel and actually look for, hacking with Cain and Abel, cracking passwords with Cain and Abel, poisoning with Cain and Abel, you will find many websites, YouTube videos, and so on that will actually tell you how to crack passwords and all the step-by-step information that you need. It's pretty amazing. Now remember that the passwords are many times stored on the computer in a hashed format, such as MD5, possibly SHA-1 or above. You can actually use tools such as this, where you go online and you don't have to even install it, where you can actually go locate a file, which is what I did here. I just looked for a file on my system and had it calculate the hash. Okay, you could do MD5, you could do SHA-1, and essentially passwords are stored in a hashed format, so we can use hashed formats for verifying integrity of files. A lot of different ones out there. I did one earlier. I selected a file and had it compute the hash, and it shows various hashes. Again, there's your MD5, SHA-1, and above. As far as wireless, or not wireless, but wired or wireless sniffing, we can use tools like Wireshark. It is something you can freely download and work with it. There's a lot of books out there, a lot of free information out there on how to use Wireshark to its fullest potential. It used to be called Ethereal in the past. And with this, I'm going to show you some screenshots. This is actually just an example of one, and you can see with the interface that it will give you a summary of the transmission information. You can then click on these, and this is just a picture here, but you can actually click on these and open them up and get great detail. As you can already see, we can see a source, MAC address, destination. This one happens to be a broadcast, or it could be to a particular computer. You can even see it in hex and ASCII down here. So there's a lot of detail. Down in these lower panes, you can actually pick up a FTP password, your username and password, if we had encountered an FTP session. Now here, they're actually using something called CurbSniff. Now, when Windows 2000 came out, we started getting away from LAN Manager, NTLM, and NTLM version 2, which was a way that we stored our hashed passwords. Then we moved into another method called Kerberos and Windows 2000 and above. And the idea was the Kerberos method would protect our passwords and protect our information in general. But then, of course, the hacking tools had to come out, like CurbSniff, who was able to listen and capture Kerberos packets and output them to a file, then follow that with an offline attack called KerbCrack that would perform a dictionary or brute force attack on that file. So then as soon as you hear there's a defense, you hear there's maybe a way around. It could be intimidating. And again, Cain and Abel again, the Cain and Abel tool, again, as you can see, is just an amazing tool. I probably should do a little bit more with this and show you just another thing. If I, again, like I told you, Cain and Abel, let's see, poisoning. Art poisoning. And you can, if you can do art poisoning and users ignore the warnings that they get on their screen when this is occurring, they will actually see lots of warnings about something going wrong with the certificates on those secured websites. If they barrel past those and just say, I'm not worried about that message, okay, and just push past it, we could very well gather their information. So videos like that, if I put the word YouTube with it, look at everything you see here. And I only did one facet of Cain and Abel. Sniffing passwords. Amazing information. I think you'd just be shocked if you actually watch some of those videos. But essentially, it can do fake certificates. I have seen Cain and Abel. I've actually used it to do this in a fun, kind of a classroom environment only, where we were simulating fake users going to like banking websites, as well as like Gmail and Yahoo email and so on. And we were able, with the email at least, to be able to pick up their passwords and their user account names. So pretty revealing. So even if you have a website that you think is secured because it's HTTPS, which is using Secure Sockets Layer, SSL, or possibly TLS, definitely, even if you're doing that, the Yahoo email, Gmail email, username and password information can be revealed. Clear as day. In this chapter, we've looked at various password attack vectors, keystroke loggers, whether they be software or hardware, Unix passwords, NAT dictionary attacks for NetBIOS, SMB shares, some various tools like Hydra, Windows passwords, rainbow tables, which is like brute force, and the passwords ahead of time and saving them as a table, password sniffing through various methods such as Wireshark, and Cain and Abel and its great power. Realize these interesting tools that you hear in this course should not be used at work just for you to get education on, because if they're used at work without permission, you start installing Cain and Abel on a computer at work, the security people are going to be alerted most likely. Beyond it being against policy most likely, they will think you're hacking. Cain and Abel is usually used by hackers. So you do have to be careful with some of these tools that you hear about during this course to not use in a work environment. Use in a very controlled environment or in maybe a home environment.